The island of Jeju lies in the China Sea, about 70 miles to the south of the mainland of Korea. Its 120 miles of coastline are dotted with little harbours, and one of the busiest of these is the port of Halim on the northern side of the island. Halim's chief export is pigs. Hundreds of them leave the quayside here every month on their way to the mainland. Struggling and squealing, they're packed into the waiting boats on the first stage of a journey that will end in the slaughterhouses of Busan and the gourmet restaurants of Seoul. It's the pig that has put Halim on the map in Korea. Even in a country of 30 million pork lovers, the Halim pig is recognized as being the best of its kind. What is less widely known is that the Halim pig, and indeed the whole Halim bacon industry, is the brainchild of a rather unusual Irishman. He's Father P.J. McGlinchey, a Columban missionary who came to Halim to preach the gospel, and who stayed on to do a lot of other things as well.
The parish started right here in this pier. We had refugee sisters came here during the war, and they got a group of people who started teaching them doctrine here. Then I was sent over to open the parish, which you can see back there, it's just back there in the distance, the site of the church. I had no funds, of course, the old story, to build a church. And when I was wondering just what to do, there was a terrific storm one night and the ship ran aground right in the middle of the parish, down about a mile down the coast here. American ship. And it had a lot of lumber on board, which was a very precious commodity here. The captain was a man by the name of Sullivan, which, as I say, was no harm at all to the whole operation. And we got this lumber. And it was at this point that I realized for the first time what the people, the caliber the people were like, or was like. They were very helpful. Hundreds of them turned out to help to carry this lumber off the ship. And with the lumber, we built the church, and we built the parish hall, and even priest house. So it was a very auspicious beginning to the parish.
Father McGlinchey spent his first years in Halim gradually building up his little Christian community. When he first came here 15 years ago, there were just 25 Catholics in Halim. Today, they number more than 2,000, and in addition to the mother church here at Halim, there are chapels in several of the outlying villages. Christianity first came to Korea in the 18th century. It was brought by Korean laymen who went to China to receive baptism and returned to preach the new religion to their fellow countrymen. The first Korean Christians had to suffer for their faith. Wave after wave of persecution struck the infant church, killing priests, destroying churches, scattering the little groups of believers. But the faith survived, and Christianity in Korea today is stronger and more widespread than ever before. There's a Korean cardinal, and the majority of the bishops and priests and nuns are native-born Koreans also. It's only in remoter areas like Jeju that the presence of European missionaries is still essential for the time being, at least until the local congregations can produce enough priests for their needs. The island of Jeju has always been a self-contained little world of its own, having scarcely any contact with the rest of men. The first Westerners to set eyes on Jeju were a boatload of French explorers who had lost their way, and they were so vague about their whereabouts that they called their new discovery Île quelque part, which means somewhere island. Even to their fellow Koreans, the people of Jeju are a race apart, living their lives in a quiet backwater, outside the mainstream of modern progress. Jeju houses are built of stone, and their thatched roofs are secured with ropes to protect them against the wind. According to an old saying, there are three abundances on the island of Jeju: an abundance of wind, an abundance of rock, and an abundance of women. Life has never been easy on the windswept rocky island, and the women of Jeju have to work even harder than most Korean women in order to look after their husbands and their families. The women work in the fields alongside their menfolk. Their agricultural methods haven't changed in 10,000 years. The seed is still scattered by hand, and the primitive wooden plough is drawn by an ox. Barley is the staple crop on Jeju, and the staple food of the people who live here. The mainlanders with their well-filled rice bowls think of barley as a food for animals only. But the soil on Jeju is too poor for rice, and the island people have lived on barley as long as anyone can remember. Harvest time is the busiest time of the year in Jeju. Everyone prays for fine weather during these days because they must live for the rest of the year on the barley that's harvested at this time. For a people who are living just above the starvation line, a bad harvest can mean famine. The first task of any missionary is to preach the gospel. But he soon finds out that he can't preach in a vacuum or live in a purely spiritual world that takes no account of the realities of daily life. Father McGlinchey gradually found himself becoming more and more involved with the problems of his parishioners, with the starvation that swept through the island in a bad year, with the poverty and undernourishment that remained even when the harvest was good. It wasn't that the people were lazy, but their methods were so primitive, and their farms, crowded into the narrow coastal strip, were so tiny and so poor that no amount of hard work could bring them anything more than a bare subsistence from the soil. And all the time, in the interior of the island, huge tracts of land lay idle and unworked. The only use the people made of this land was as a burial place for their dead. The thought of using it for agriculture never seemed to have crossed anyone's mind.
Well, as you've noted yourself, the average farm has got about an acre of land, small fields with stone walls around them. And surprisingly enough, there's about 250,000 acres of land in the interior of the island. This amazed me, because I always heard, you know, we used to read at home about the Far East people standing on one another's toes almost, the population being so thick. But here we got this huge area of land with nobody living on it and nobody working it. This amazed me, still does, that such a thing could exist in this country or in this area. So I used to talk to the farmers about this when I came here. I spent about 7 years talking about their improving of their farming conditions and just discussing things. But it is very difficult to get across the idea of improvement just by conversation. That's why I got involved directly in this thing myself. I started with a model farm, went on from there.
From this modest beginning has come the Isidore Development Association, the most ambitious agricultural project in the whole history of Jeju. Father McGlinchey was anxious to prove not only that the highlands could produce food, but also that modern machinery could greatly increase production. From his native Ireland, he obtained a fleet of tractors provided by Goethe, and a young man, a mechanic, who volunteered to come out and look after them. It was farming on a scale never known before on the island, and it worked. Indeed, it worked so well that Father McGlinchey decided to apply the same mass production techniques to the livestock industry, and in particular to the rearing of pigs.
Well, if you ever saw the native Jeju pig, you know, you would understand why we're in this business of pigs here. The pig is very important, but it's a very miserable, sad-looking animal. It takes a long time to grow, narrow hands, doesn't take in much money to the family. So that's why we got started in pigs, to try and improve the quality and make it bring in more money to the farmer. That's our main idea.
The average Jeju farm has 1 pig or at most 2. Father McGlinchey's farm has an average resident population of 12,000 pigs. The native Jeju pig takes 18 months to fatten, and even then is lean enough. The pigs on the Isidore farm, bred from imported stock, can be fattened in 6 months. The Isidore farm, as well as being a breeding centre, is also an animal bank for the island. Local farmers can obtain pigs here for breeding or fattening and can pay for them from the proceeds a year or 2 later. In this way, the uneconomic native pig will in time be completely replaced by the imported breeds. Any visitor to the farm at Hallam is immediately struck by the architecture of the place. The buildings look like inverted boats, with walls and roof all made from the same concrete shell. These buildings are called tesiphons, after the place where they originated, and they have the advantage of being immensely strong and durable. Father McGlinchey found that traditional type buildings didn't survive long on these exposed and windy slopes, whereas the sturdy tesiphon could withstand the worst of the winter storms. And so the countryside around Hallam began to break out into a rash of tesiphons, built in 100 different sizes and for 100 different purposes. Pigsties, barns, dwelling houses, even churches. Meanwhile, Father McGlinchey was thinking about sheep.
Well, as you can see, it's a good sheep country. If this were New Zealand, a New Zealand farmer would have sheep stuck like flies in every hill here, and he'd be making money from this land, which is idle in Jeju. The Korean farmer is missing an awful lot. So we introduced sheep to try and help him to get more money for his family. It's not an easy job. There are certain prejudices against sheep. Some old wives' tales. Stuff like if you graze sheep on a field, the cattle won't graze after the sheep. They say that the sheep leave a smell. This is ridiculous, and we're proving it here. We're bringing farmers in and showing them the cattle and the sheep coexisting in the best Marxian fashion, I suppose you could say. So it's a very important thing from our point of view to help the farmers here to make better use of this land to improve their incomes. And sheep is a very obvious thing. It's like the west of Donegal, it's like the west of Ireland, but especially New Zealand. There's where they really make use of land like this. I was there not too long ago, and you'll see sheep covering. If this, as I say, where in New Zealand you would have sheep from the bottom to the tops of all these hills here.
The sheep took to Jeju as a duck takes to water. They were a gift from Corso in New Zealand, just one of the many gifts that have made the Isidore farm scheme a reality. Father McGlinchey has become an accomplished beggar on behalf of his people, and there are few charitable sources that he hasn't touched. Oxfam and CAFOD in England, Germany's Miserior, Canadian Oxfam, Catholic Relief in Australia, America and Canada, US government aid, all have been approached for help and have responded generously. The introduction of the sheep will have a lasting effect on the economy of the island. They can graze on the steep hillsides which are useless for any other purpose. Their meat provides a new and valuable source of food. Their wool forms the raw material for a flourishing new local industry.
You mean to raise it more? Yes. I think should have more finish.
It was perhaps inevitable that sooner or later Father McGlinchey would find himself involved in setting up a manufacturing industry, and it was the sheep that provided the final spur. A group of Columban sisters came from Ireland to help him establish a hand-weaving plant that has gone from strength to strength and now employs more than 30 people in the town of Hallin. There was no tradition of wool making in Jeju to build on, but Father McGlinchey's home county of Donegal has a flourishing cottage tweed industry, and what worked in Donegal should work in Jeju also. He had a spinning wheel sent out from home and got a local carpenter to make copies of it. He gradually added other machines until he had a factory that could cope with every stage in the weaving process, from the wool leaving the sheep's back to the finished roll of cloth. The finished product is marketed under the trade name of Hallam Tweed and has sold very successfully all over Korea. What has originally started as an outlet for the small sheep farmer has blossomed into one of the pacemakers of the Korean fashion industry. The Jeju project is trying to provide people with the basic essentials for a human life. Food and education for their children, a home that is comfortable and secure, a plot of land that's large enough for a man to make a living from. During the past 8 years, 260 families have been settled in the Hallam Hills. Each family has been given a house, an outhouse, 25 acres of land, and a supply of seed and livestock. In the years to come, it's hoped that many more can be settled in the same way until all the land on Jeju is being properly used and everyone on the island can look forward to a decent standard of living for himself and for his children.
Well, I know many people who could do the job much better than I could, who are technically trained for it. But why am I doing this sort of thing here in this particular spot? I would say that it's because as a foreign missionary sent here to preach Christianity, I'm bound to get the people to love one another, and therefore I have to prove that I have love for them myself. And I do try and help them, provide a service which they think, which is very badly needed themselves, and is ad rem, is to the point here in this type of a situation. Very much required for people. They're farmers. They have to live. They depend on livestock and the land. They need help in making a better job of it. And I act as a link with people who want to help these local people here. And I think it's a very well worthwhile type of modern Christian charity, as distinct from the traditional approach of orphanages and so on that priests. To me, this is 20th century Christianity in practice, if you like.
또 물론 여러 지금 한 사람 지금 돈 얼마 벌지 않은 사람 남에게 큰 돈 줄 수 없어요.
Every Thursday evening, Father McGlinchey says a special mass for the people who live around the Isidore farm. Afterwards, they crowd into the living room of the house for a talk from him.
남을 사랑하는 거지. 응? 그러나 남을만 전가하는 것보다 그 사람 비례하는 도움 꼭 필요한.
If your neighbor's child comes to your door and says that his father is sick, what do you do? Do you say, "I'm very sorry to hear it, but there's nothing that I can do"? That's not Christianity. Or do you go to his house at once? Do you try to help him? Do you send for the doctor? Do you bring him to the hospital? If you do, then you are really acting like a Christian. You can't love God unless you love your neighbor as well.
나 관계없다. 그 대신 그것이 그 사람 사랑하는 거죠. 자기 자신 일어서서 말이요. 그 남에 대해서
The message is simple but effective.
그 사람
And it's all the more effective because they know that the priest believes it himself and puts it into practice every minute of his life.
돈 아주 가난한 집이고 약살 돈 없고 그 대신 자기한테 그 사람 사랑하는 거지.
Today the farm at Hallam has become one of the sights of Jeju. Every day the buses come toiling up the rocky mountain road full of tourists from the mainland who are anxious to see the farm, the 12,000 pigs and the man who dreamed it all up. Father McGlinchey is always happy to see visitors coming to look at the farm and the development project. He likes to meet them, to talk to them and to explain what he's trying to do. But he doesn't preach any sermons to them. He doesn't have to. The whole place is a sermon about love. It's about the kind of love that led a young Irish lad to devote his life to the service of God and his fellow men, that inspired him to join the worldwide missionary family of the Columban Fathers, that sent him halfway round the globe to preach the gospel and to herd pigs on a Korean hillside. Not every missionary is called to the same kind of apostolate, but every missionary has the same duty to use the talents that God has given him for the people among whom he works. It's a demanding life, and it calls for complete dedication, renewed every day. But it's also a deeply rewarding life, and its full achievement will be known only in eternity.